That's the craziest start to a podcast I've ever done.
I think we're gonna keep that in.
I like it.
Jack, Jack, you are what I consider a triple threat of content creators. You're an amazing writer, you create great video content on YouTube, and you're a great podcaster. I've been consuming a lot of your content these last couple of weeks. I'm going to ask you a question which I know you're going to be able to answer very well because I see it in your content often. I want you to imagine you're going back 2 years in your own life and you're having a conversation with the Jack of 2 years ago. What sort of advice are you going to give him? And what sort of good news do you have for the Jack of 2 years ago of what you've accomplished over these next 2 years?
Damn, I really like that question because you've got me thinking deeply. Where was I at 2 years ago? So, for context, where I was at 2 years ago, January 2022, I was still on the Northwestern football team. I was recovering from a torn ACL, and I was taking the train from Northwestern to downtown Chicago every single day to work an unpaid corporate finance internship, like on crutches. Like I'd have to go on crutches in the snow and ice to the train at 7 a.m. every day, waking up at 4 to like go work out, do rehab, catch the train, get back at 7 at night. And it was like miserable. There was times like I would fall on my crutches and I'd be like, what the like I had this victim mentality in life of like, woe is me and like
Mm,
everything is against me. But what I would tell that version of myself is a two-letter phrase that was actually kind of like the ethos of our football team, which has stayed with me to this day. It's trust yourself. Like trust yourself, trust that things are unfolding as they're supposed to, even if you can't see the light on the other end of this tunnel. You're going through this tunnel for a reason. You're going to learn a lot about yourself over the next couple months. And what I would have to say to him is your potential is higher than you think it currently is as a football player. You can be more as a human being than a football player, but you have to trust yourself to open yourself to new experiences and try new things that are out of your comfort zone.
beautiful, man. That's a great piece of advice to anybody that's going through struggle like that. So something interesting just came to me because I know your story somewhat, and as you shared that, I thought, how much of your identity was wrapped up in being an athlete and being a football player up to that point? And it
Mhm.
sounds like, as you said, your potential as a human is bigger than your potential as a football player. So, how much of your identity was wrapped up in that? And then, what was the experience like to drop that piece of your identity and turn into a content creator, a writer, and a businessman who you are here today?
Yeah, so it wasn't so strategically planned that like these would be the next steps, but I'll get into why in a second. But how much of my identity was tied into that? It was everything. It was absolutely everything because growing up, sports gave me a sense of intrinsic value because my especially my dad was a really really good athlete himself, baseball, basketball, football, track. He played college football at a division 2 level, and he coached me in all my sports as a kid. So he was my basketball coach, he was my baseball coach, he was my football coach. It was everything. And so to live up to the father's approval as we do as young kids,
Yeah.
you have to embody that as your firm identity. And then once you get positive reinforcement from people around you that, oh, you're good or you're valuable because you're good at this, it just reinforces it anymore. And so, like in high school, I think it probably peaked like senior year of high school. I was the quarterback of my high school. Like we had a pretty big following within the community. Like 5,000 people would come to the games, and like you're the center of that. And you can't imagine life where you're not that center of that action.
Yeah.
Then going into college, like identifying with that label of like I'm a Division 1 football player, like I'm a wide receiver at a Big 10 school. That was something I would feel very proud of to say because it gives you a boost in status, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, over time in college, I started to resent that identity a little bit, or more so like resent the fact that I wasn't living up to that identity because my college football career was not as I envisioned it to go. Like I had two shoulder surgeries. I had a torn ACL. Like I was like eighth on the depth chart. I wasn't gonna play like probably my whole career. And so after I tore my ACL my sophomore year, I was at this crossroads where I was like, I can either stay here at Northwestern, try to keep grinding, maybe play special teams senior year, maybe, I could transfer to a Division 3 school and play quarterback, which would keep me in that identity and give me status. Like
Yes.
looking back, that's what it was, and I was very close to that decision. I tried to transfer to University of Chicago to play quarterback, and I was on the wait list. But while I was on the wait list, it was spring break of 2022 March, and for whatever reason, my curiosity took me to Joe Rogan, Michael Pollan, Paul Stamets, Terrence McKenna, and I started to become interested in psychedelics for whatever
Bro,
reason.
bro, you are
And
in our wheelhouse right now, bro.
yeah,
Hell
I knew
yeah.
you'd like it. And so what I did during that spring break is I remember one morning my parents and my sister were going on a spring break trip to Mexico for my sister's senior trip, and I was going to have the house to myself that weekend. And what I did is I drove them to the airport, came back. It was like Friday morning at 7 a.m., and I had the whole weekend. And I was like, I'm just going to look within myself this weekend and see what happens if I do take mushrooms as this tool to figure out this decision. And in that trip, it was the first time I saw myself as just like a being or just like a human being rather than a football player, Division 1 wide receiver, a quarterback, all this stuff. And I realized that like that identity kept my potential limited because like as a football player, even if you go to the NFL, you're gonna peak at like 25 to 28. But if you broaden out that identity, or if you even drop the identity altogether, your potential becomes as unlimited as your mind is open. And I wasn't able to see it that way before my mind was literally expanded by these tools or these psychedelic drugs.
Yeah.
And so that sent me on this rabbit hole of self discovery because I didn't adopt the new identity of like writer, creator, entrepreneur right away. That was gradual. But for the next couple months after that experience, when I quit the team, I just became a normal student. And like that became my identity. But it was just I'm just curious. I just want to work on myself. And then that led to the creator stuff a couple months later.
That's so cool, bro. I did not know that piece of your story, and I love to hear that. I can relate so much. There's a couple things that come to mind. So, mushrooms are huge in my life. Those are my go-to teachers. I always say if I have a big decision to make, I'm gonna ask the mushrooms, right?
Mm,
Because it can expand your perspective, your idea. So there's so much in what you just said. Let me start with this. A question that I'll ask myself in the psychedelic universe, or I've gotten to the point where with meditation and all that, I can do it sober as well, and it can be very fruitful, is I always go, what would I be if I wasn't blank? Right. So in your
mm,
case, what would I be if I wasn't a football player? And being able to really experience that of like, oh God, you can see your attachment again to that
yeah.
identity, to that status, to everything that goes along with it. And it can be very scary, right? To drop that and go kind of just be, my buddy and I always say psychedelics will just make you naked. Everything falls
Yeah.
away and
Yeah.
you're naked and exposed and vulnerable to the raw human that you are. So
Hmm.
I often, even sober, a big part of my career is I'm an electrical engineer, and there's so much wrapped up in that. And I get a lot of status because of it. I worked over a decade to get to this point, but I like to always remind myself, okay, Nick, what would you be if you weren't an electric engineer? What would you be if you weren't
Mm,
a writer? And then there's like really heavy ones like being a father. What would you be if you weren't a father? Right? I obviously am a father. It's my most important job. Like I take it really it's really meaningful to me. But I like to just check in of like how much am I attached to all these different identities and these things that I sort of pile on top of just my pure being as it is, right? And
mm,
what does it feel like to sort of drop those, if only for a moment, to then reassess what is it that I want to do in this lifetime? What is it that I want to experience? What is it that I want to create with the limited time that I have here? So it sounds like you had a very good intuition that I agree. It's a hard place to get without some sort of an aid for the first time, like psychedelics.
mm,
You had a very good intuition, and it seems like the mushrooms showed you that. They said, "Hey, you could be something else than
Mm,
what you see as your future. And so that's really cool that it sort of piqued your curiosity and showed you a whole new realm and a whole new direction to go. The one other thing I was going to say, such a great insight to see that even if you went all in and you became a professional football player, you're going to peak in your late 20s, maybe at the best, right? 30 if you're like an absolute all-time,
yeah.
killer. And then you got the rest of your life, right? And so you're going to have to face this eventually of dropping
Hmm.
this identity
Yeah.
and this attachment to being an athlete. And so I can relate in that part of what got me into writing was I've heard people say writing is one of the careers and the skills where most people peak in their 70s,
Hmm.
right? It
Yeah.
compounds, it compounds. You build leverage forever when you're a writer, when you're an artist, when you're a creative. And so it's really cool that the psychedelics piqued your curiosity in that direction. And then you ended up in this field where you're in your early 20s. How old are you?
Yeah. I'm 22.
22, bro. Okay. So if you are able to stick in this direction, you're going to have decades of compounding this skill and this art form. It's really cool the way that all of that lined up. Is that something that you think about? Like, again, I know you're very young. Do you imagine if I stick with writing, where would I be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road? Is that something that you contemplate?
All the time. That was the biggest thing that actually got me into writing publicly in the first place. So a few months after that psychedelic experience in March, when I quit football, 2022, I went backpacking throughout Europe with one of my best friends as a kid. And during that trip, I was just journaling a ton. I wrote like 200, 300 pages in a journal. And that was when the insight hit me of like, okay, my potential as a football player was capped at 25. But as a writer, your potential theoretically is never capped. Like you could
Yeah.
get better until the day you die. So it's like, what long term game can I play to pursue mastery in the long run? And so then that's why I started sending a newsletter to like my family and friends, and then writing on Twitter, etc. But it is something I always try to think about, and I'm actually writing my next newsletter on this topic, like long term thinking,
Mm.
because we can get so wrapped up in the day to day and the week to week. But like if you zoom out and you realize like whether you're in your early 20s or early 30s, like if you pick a pursuit that you can improve at for the next 20 to 50 years, you don't have to have it all now. And that's okay because you're on this like slow compounding journey to mastery. And one other thing to add is like, it's not even just compounding of audience or followers or readers or dollars. It's compounding of ideas because
100.
like each idea allows for new insights to happen. So like the ideas I have now hopefully will pale in comparison to ideas I might have when I'm 40 or 50. I would hope, or else that means I stop growing.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully put, dude. I love the both sides of that. You're compounding an audience, like people are getting invested with you over time. They get invested in your story and your journey. But to me, the beautiful thing is compounding your ideas because every new idea you can see the parallels in other ones and draw new
Mm,
connections and find new ways to express your own message, your own unique take on these philosophies and these different mindsets. And then also the skill set itself, you become a better writer with time. You
yes.
learn how to communicate your message better and all that. So like those three pillars of compounding over decades, I totally agree. I was going to ask, you familiar with Robert Greene, 48 Laws of
Yes.
Power? Okay, have you
I'm
read
actually
Mastery?
I'm literally rereading it right now, which is
Wow,
really
bro, that's
funny.
awesome. Hell yeah.
Um, I always was very obsessed with the first section, which was like returning to your zone of genius, like going
Yeah,
within,
finding your
finding what
calling.
those, yeah, all of that. I was very obsessed with it for a while, but like the second phase or the third phase never made as much sense to me yet because I didn't have the experience to see it through. Like the apprenticeship phase, I didn't
Mm,
have somebody to look up to, and then the mastery phase, like I wasn't in the mastery phase yet, and I'm still not. Like that's a very long game, but
mhm.
now it's interesting, like because I've been blessed with the opportunity to work at Cortex right now, and like I get to observe Dan. Like that is making the submit to the ideal apprenticeship section extremely applicable. So I've been rereading that actually, which is funny.
That's so cool, dude. So that's a cornerstone book in my life for sure. And so I came to this journey like about a decade after you, right? So I was in my early 30s, but I had luckily served literal apprenticeships in the electrical field, right? I'd
Mm,
done 3 year apprenticeships. So I had this example in my life of exactly what Robert Greene's talking about, of really submitting to the master and like being a white belt, being a no mind in Zen of like, okay, I have to actually drop all my old ideas of things and look at this master and how they have learned this skill set and mastered the skill set. And so I had this example in my personal life, and I started wanting to write. I'm reading Mastery, and I go, okay, like it made perfect sense for me because I had an experiential side of it, right? So it's really cool
mm,
to hear that you read the book and where you were at, it was like, okay, what's really making sense to me is finding my calling. Returning to those childhood dreams and what I enjoyed to do, what I would do for free, all that kind of stuff, and it makes sense of that connected. And then as you started that path, as you started following this calling, then the next parts will make a lot more sense. And it sounds like we're like, I'm 12 years older than you, but we're both in that apprenticeship phase now. And so when you go and read those beautiful stories that Robert talks about and the examples that he gives, you can connect it immediately to your own experience and your own strategy of where you're at right now. And I'm so happy to hear that you're working with a master, in my opinion, Dan Coe. He's amazing in this game. He may be the best that there is. Really, really happy to hear that, bro, that you landed that you attracted that into your life. Let's go into that a little bit. What's your relationship with Dan? How did you guys meet? And what was it like early on? And where are you at now with working with this social media content creator master?
yeah. So I originally found this side of the internet because of Dan. Like I just listened to all his podcasts, consumed all his newsletters, literally anything he put out, I would consume. Um, because I saw him as like that ideal or that like actualized version of myself in a way, and
Yeah,
in all areas too, which is something I respect about him so much. It's like he's not just crushing it in business, he's not just crushing it in writing, he's also crushing it from a spirituality lens, from a philosophy lens, and from a health lens too, which is
yeah,
really cool. But how it kind of came together was this summer, I joined Justin Scott's academy, his Absolute Abundance Academy, which was awesome. I definitely recommend checking it out. And from that program, I got decent results. And me and Justin became close throughout that process. And he saw that I understood this game like at a holistic level.
yeah,
And at the time, they were starting to build out Cortex University, which is the educational side of the business. The software, I don't do anything with that. I'm not technical. I don't know that side of things. But for the education, they were looking for some educators or consultants to help with the Cortex University. And essentially, Justin proposed my name to Dan, and Dan was like, "Yeah, like it seems like he knows what he's doing." So that's kind of how it started. Right now, that's pretty much what I'm doing, just helping with the community. I'm giving my first like lecture on Friday, I guess you could call it, and then I'm also doing some writing for them for like their Twitter and then some newsletters and stuff.
that's so exciting, dude. First off, Justin is I've been going back and forth on the DMs with him, trying to get him on the podcast. So put in a good word for me, bro. His
I
content
will.
is amazing, bro, and I really think that we could go some deep, interesting places. Yeah, it's so cool that you had that connection, that friendship with him, and that yeah, now you're in a room with killers, and you're going to be presenting your first lecture. Great, good luck on that. I'm sure you're putting a lot of work into it, and it's going to be a little bit of imposter syndrome and all that, like every step of this journey. And I know you're going
100%.
to kill it, man. Right on. That's really cool. So, okay, this is, I have some notes here that I definitely got to hit with you. The reason I reached out to you in the first place was a post of yours. It's early, man. I don't know why I got this frog in my throat. A post
No
of yours
worries.
where you had all these books laid out, and I had read about half of them. And I go, okay, like it's one thing to be able to hear people's, you know, content on YouTube and to read their writings. But when I know what somebody's reading, when I know what they're interested in, I know, okay, we can really connect well in a conversation on a podcast. So on this list, you had a lot of Alan Watts, who has been maybe my number one longest running spiritual guru from afar. So we're going to definitely get into Alan Watts. I seen that you had Ken Wilber also on your reading list, which is that's up there with Robert Greene. It's some very dense, big
Dense.
ass
Yeah.
books, and so you got to read paragraphs over a couple times to really grok it. So we're gonna get into Alan Watts. We're gonna get into Ken Wilber, and then I see you're also reading David Hawkins, who I have not read. I'm familiar with some of his main ideas. So I'm going to use this opportunity selfishly to hear about what you've read or what you're learning from David Hawkins so far.
Yeah, so for full transparency, I haven't dove too deep into the Hawkins yet. I've actually like more so gravitated towards Wilbur and Watts. But I just put out a post of this right before we hopped on. Over the past 6 to 9 months, I've oscillated between spirituality focused and business focused.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 to 9 months ago, I was so deep in the spirituality. I was obsessed with Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Michael Singer. Like they were very impactful in my life, and we can get into why. And then I'd say about September of last year, my focus shifted. It shifted very much to build projects, launch projects, scale the business, grow the business. And as of literally yesterday, I just had a realization that I've fallen out of alignment with the spiritual stuff. And that the next step of my journey is, like, to put it in Ken Wilber's words, is to transcend and include, to reach the higher
Mm.
state of evolution. And I do feel like I'm heading back in that direction of being able to integrate the two approaches. And literally this morning, I was reading Ken Wilber's Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality. Have you read that book?
I have. Yeah, I listened to the audiobook. Yes.
It's crazy dense. It's like
It
it's
is.
like 800 pages. I read the first 50. And the reason I actually got that book, it came in the mail 2 days ago. I started it yesterday. I was reading it this morning. Is Dan Coe actually said, dude, you got to read this book. Like it's super dense, but you got to read this book. And so it's interesting that he told me to read that book. I get on this podcast with you where it's like
I was gonna say,
pretty
bro,
spiritual lens. And then
divine timing, bro.
yeah, and I'm talking to like Danny Miranda about he's doing like a retreat later next month. And I filled out this questionnaire last night for the retreat, and it had me thinking more deeply about these questions that I haven't thought about in months because I've been so business focused in a long time. And I realized I've fallen out of alignment. So I kind of diverged your question, but I think that's the context of why I maybe haven't dove into it as much.
Yeah, no, that's great, bro. So that's really cool getting into your own little personal journey here of where you're at with business and spirituality. And you brought up a great phrase, transcend and include. That's I think of all of Ken Wilber's ideas, I think that's his greatest contribution to not
Mm,
just spiritual thinking, but like holistic business, health, everything. Transcend and
mm.
include is such a beautiful idea that you don't want to ignore one piece of the holistic pie in pursuit of the other, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
something that it's easier said than done. We're going to find ourselves doing that all the time. And it seems like you just found yourself doing that over the last 6 months here, that you were focused all in on business. I'm sure you're able to justify this to yourself of I'm young and I need to build leverage and I need to, go all in on this. And it just, again, divine timing, something hits you with, no, I have to actually balance this out because if not, I'm going to be not transcending my skills and my direction as a businessman, but I'm going to be suppressing this other essential part of myself. And it sounds
Mm.
like that essential part is the spirituality side. So we're gonna I do this often, do a little bit of spiritual therapy here, and we're gonna dig into your past and all that. And I'm gonna ask one of my favorite questions to ask on this podcast because I think it'll help to frame this direction that you're headed in. The Matrix. Everybody has a different idea of what quote the Matrix is in their own experience, but I have a feeling, particularly with psychedelics, particularly with this journey that you've been on, at some point in your life you had a moment of realizing you were in a matrix and you were able to step out and see it from the outside. And you go, oh, wow, I was programmed, or I was acting like an NPC, or I was sort of stuck in this world. And you're able to step out and look at that world from the outside. You're able to see through the matrix. So when I bring that idea up, what's one of the first things that comes to mind? One of the first realizations, one of the first moments that you can think of in your past of starting to get a glimpse through the matrix?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's been multiple periods where it's been reinforced more and more. That first psychedelic experience probably showed me like this idea we have of like normal or society is all just a construct. It's not actually based in reality. It's kind of this act we all collectively put on to cooperate. And
Mm.
without that, society would probably collapse. So there's probably some good in it, right? But a few months later, when I went on that backpacking trip to Europe and like I didn't do the corporate internship that I was quote unquote supposed to do, and yet I had 3 months of personal growth that I felt like I grew more in 3 months than I did in 2 years. That showed me like, okay, wait, there are no real shoulds. And then it kept happening over and over again. Like this year, actually, in March, when I started making a full-time living ghostwriting, but yet I was still in school, it was that same idea of should. It's like you should finish school, you should get the degree. What if an employer wants you to have a degree? And I just realized they're all just not true. Like it's all just people's idea of what is quote unquote normal. But when you step outside that and you realize, oh, I didn't die, like I have the autonomy to go have my own beliefs and pursue my own things and not conform, you gain immense self confidence
Yes.
by realizing that you can actually go against the grain and it's probably going to be okay.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, dude. Because I was thinking throughout, part of what quote keeps us in the matrix is always fear. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lack of self confidence in ourselves, right? That you want to go with the safe script. You want to finish school. What if an employer wants this? Down the road, am I going to regret it? But you've had these examples in your life of it actually doesn't seem to be all that essential. When I have my energy in the right place, when I have my focus in the right place, right? I'm reinforced with the confidence of it working for me, right? And not only that, again, in the to get back to the apprenticeship, you see examples of other people, and you have examples of other people in your life that have pulled it off, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those like, man, if they can do it, I can do it. And then it's just breaking through that imposter syndrome. It's just having the courage to really dive in and go all in on it. And that is one way that you can break out of the quote matrix is one day at a time, diligently, with courage, taking a step in that direction that is really calling to you, that really is aligned with your energy, that's calling to your soul. It sounds like that's something
Yeah,
you've been doing, man.
definitely. And one framework or like mental model that I love to use for these decisions to go an alternative path is who are the people you aspire to be like? Like, who are your tribe of mentors or round table of elders or whatever you want to call it? And for me, it was Jordan Peterson, Dan Coe, Naval, and I could probably think of a number of different names. But like when I was making that decision to leave college, I looked to what those couple people would say.
Yeah.
Danco dropped out of college. Naval, if you go and search on YouTube, he thinks that it's more impressive to go to a top university and drop out of the university than to stay in and finish because it shows self belief and courage. And
Yeah.
Peterson has been basically shitting on the university system for the last 5 years, and he's starting his own online university. And it's like, those are the three people I aspire to be like. I hold their ideas and thinking in higher regard than the people in my life who are not living lives I want to live. And that's not to put their way of life down, but it's about knowing what you want and knowing what you don't want. And
Yeah.
realizing that if you just blindly comply with what everybody tells you you should do or should want, you're going to live the exact same life as them. And so, in order to create extraordinary results, you have to take extraordinary actions, but that requires a leap of courage, a leap of faith, stepping into the unknown, going against the grain. And I think like why I think Twitter, the creator economy is so powerful is you find other people who are like you, who are also stepping against the grain to show you that you're not actually as crazy as many people might think.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, dude. It's another thing that I do often. Again, I'm in the electrical field, and I look at other men that have done my exact path of where I'm at right now. Right? They were where I was at 34, and I see them now at 55 or 60. And there's not one that I look at that goes where I go, that's where I want to be when I'm 55 or
Mm-hmm.
60. And again, not shitting on anyone, to each their own, but this is really getting honest with yourself. And I believe Stoicism, Buddhism, we have this one life. This life is precious. Tomorrow's not even guaranteed, but you have to live as if you know you're going to live a full, healthy life, 90-year life or whatever, right? So I always like to begin with that end in mind of like, who are the bad motherfuckers down the road that I want to be like? Like, not just
Hmm.
to accomplish what they've accomplished, that's a huge part of it, but even more like to be able to embody and show up the way that they do. You brought up Jordan Peterson, who I've talked about on this podcast often. I call him my internet dad. You know, my
Yeah.
my dad took off when I was young, so I didn't really have a male figure in my life. And when I stumbled upon Jordan Peterson, I was like, this is the fucking dad that I always needed, because I need all the basic things he talks about: taking responsibility, tell the truth, don't lie, be true to the highest ideal of yourself, understand what that highest ideal is, and pursue it. And if you really do that, again, it's a very scary thing to do, but you can at least feel good in every decision, every action you're making, because you're moving towards a the best estimation you have of the end result that you want to end up at down the road in your 60s, in
Mm-hmm.
your 70s, in your 80s, right? You're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to hopefully learn from those mistakes as much as possible. But it's such a different thing than like, okay, the safe route is maybe get a degree, maybe get into a Fortune 500 company, have some sort of a 401k, and I can just kind of ride it out to the end. And then this is, Dan Co 101. And then I'll start living, right? After I've done a job that I've hated my whole life, and I've showed up as less than my best self, and I'm in
Yeah.
relationships that are less than my best relationship, because like attracts like, right? They're gonna see that I'm not going for it. I'm not being true to myself fully. And so I just want to commend you on that perspective of being able to see what the end result is that you want, and then trying to emulate that in your own way, your own unique way, as much as possible.
Yeah. And you brought up something about going another path is scary, but the scariest thing to me is looking back at 50 or 60 and like wishing I would have tried and knowing that I could have been more. And that was something that drove me to even start any type of personal development journey before Twitter, before writing, even before psychedelics. It was, I was sitting in my dorm room in college, like basically escaping reality, numbing myself with like weed and video games with this torn ACL and like not being able to move much or work out. So I'm like starting to like get a little bit chunkier than I ever had been or like to be. And I was smoking one night and I went down this thought rabbit hole of like, dude, if you don't like figure something out or change how you're acting, you are going to be that like 50-year-old dude at the hometown high school bar, like super overweight, like reflecting on his glory days. And that scared the shit out of me and it scared me into action. And like it's something I always talk about is like if you can't figure out what you want to run towards, you need to figure out what to run away from. Because
Yes.
going in the other direction, even if you don't know where exactly that's going to be, it's better than the alternative. You're moving towards something higher and something better. And like, I find fear is a great motivator. Now, it's not great to be acting out of fear, right? We want to be acting out of abundance. But if fear is there, as Hormozy would say, like, you might as well use it.
Yeah, beautiful, dude. I think the first Dan Co YouTube video I came across was create an anti-vision, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that or you've read his articles on that. It sounds like that was such a cool, clear. I love very concise, not sort of abstract ideas, but an actual image. You have a very concise anti-image of being 50 something, at the
Yeah.
local bar, out of shape, and reflecting on the glory days of when you were the quarterback, of your high school. It's a really great anti-vision to have. Again, bringing it back to Peterson, he likes to talk about the research with rats when it comes to cats and cheese, and it's the idea that you can put a little spring on the tail of a rat, and you can waft some cheese in from the front of the cage, right? Especially if they're hungry, they're going to pull really hard to get towards that cheese, and you can measure the strength at which they pull, right? And so they did that research. They saw how hard the rats would pull, and then they started wafting in the smell of cats from behind the cage, and they would see that the rat would pull even harder if
Yeah.
it had the fear for its life of getting away from the cat. And then they would simultaneously waft the smell of cheese and waft the smell of the cat, and that's when it would pull the hardest, because it's trying to get to the cheese because it's fucking hungry. It's trying to get away from the cat because it wants to stay alive. So it sounds like you have a very good visualization of what your cat is, what
Yeah.
you're what you're moving away from. I want to ask you how much you've reflected on what your cheese is. What is that goal that you're pursuing? Um, how concise is it, or is it sort of abstract and vague? What is the cheese that Jack is pursuing in this lifetime?
Yeah, another great question. So this one is a little bit harder to articulate or put into words because I do feel your vision evolved as you evolve, whereas the
Okay,
anti-vision is more of a firm thing that stays.
agreed.
So when I started in this, my only cheese was not working in the corporate 9 to 5 job and being able to have location freedom. I
Yeah.
achieved that. I left college, I moved to Buenos Aires in Costa Rica, and I was like working for an hour or two a day on the beach. And like I had quote unquote made it by my past self standards, but I started to feel this emptiness, like not pursuing anything more. And so after some more psychedelic experiences and introspection, I realized that straight off the Viktor Frankl quote, like self actualization can only happen as a byproduct of self transcendence. And what that
Mm,
means essentially is like to become this higher version of yourself, you have to transcend yourself and serve others. And so then I started literally just helping creators for free with like systems and like organization and performance and stuff. And I felt that meaning again. So that's to say it's evolved. What do I see it as now? This was like a very deep insight I had back in September was like, and I almost don't, it's interesting because it's so close to me, like the experience when I had this that I've like shied away from sharing it, but I guess I'll give a glimpse. It's like I had this ayahuasca experience that showed me what my potential could be and the amount of people I could impact and serve. And that the only thing stopping me from that vision would be myself stopping or imposter syndrome or just not wanting to take action. So the overarching thing that I'm going for is helping open people's minds and create lives that they're pursuing their potential.
mm,
Whereas what I see, and this sometimes can frustrate me, is like, especially at the age I'm at, all of my friends who I've known my whole life, like we're all about to graduate college. I would be if I was still there. And I see the potential in so many people for doing great things, but it's these shoulds. I should just get this job. I should just like pigeonhole myself into this career. And it frustrates me because I know they could be more, but sometimes they don't see it in themselves, so they don't know there's another path. And I want to be like a shining light that there is another path, there's another way.
mm. That's beautiful. That is a powerful cheese right there to be to
Yeah.
be headed after. It sounds like self transcendence through service, right?
Hmm.
And it's terrifying to accept your own potential greatness, right? And it sounds like we
Hmm.
got a little glimpse of that in that ayahuasca trip of, whoa, it's scary and unbelievable to me what actually could accomplish if I
Yeah.
pursue it, if I really truly pursue it, and don't give up, overcome the obstacles and all the imposter syndrome and all the fear based around that. And then it sounds too, which I think is beautiful, is you're doing this not ultimately for it's sort of like it's two sides of the coin. It is ultimately for yourself, but because of that, this is something I talk with Ego a lot about. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with his work. I was on his podcast recently. Ultimate selfishness of me realizing my best actualized self is the best altruism, because you're a shining light.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, you're able to help more people instead of the idea of like, well, I'm not going to work on myself or fully realizing my dreams because I'm going to take that energy and help other people to do it. But you're working with less energy. There's less fuel there. But actually, if you pursue your highest calling and overcome your fears, you now actually have the foundation, and you're able to exude and be the cup that's not half full but overflowing and flowing into all of these other people to go, oh wow, he's an example, Jack's an example of something that I want. If he did it, I can do it. And you can speak with so much more authority because you actually are living and being in that state of expression.
Yeah. One thing you said there that is so true is when you get a glimpse of who you could be if you were all you could be, at that realization, you have another realization. Whereas I'm going to remember this vision forever. And if I don't work to actualize that vision, I'll be plagued with the knowingness that I didn't hit that potential. And so I
Yes.
remember like during that ayahuasca experience, that was the insight. For 20, 30 minutes, all I could think about was that vision and that potential. And then it turned into almost like self-conscious thought of like, now you know, you've seen the other side, you've taken the red pill, and now
Yes.
you're gonna remember this for the rest of your life if you don't pursue that.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's spot on. I love that.
That's beautiful, dude. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like once you know, you know. It's like fuck. I wish I almost didn't know, but now that I do, I can't
Yeah.
bullshit. I can't bullshit
Right.
myself. And you have
Yeah.
to live with that regret of knowing of what your potential was, and you know that you didn't pursue it. This perfectly leads in. We've been dancing around this exact question that I like to ask all my guests. So we're gonna probably sort of just build on exactly what we've talked about up to this point. So again, Laughing Stoic Buddha podcast. We're going to talk about some Stoic ideas here. Something that's big in my life is memento mori, remembering that you will die. So the exercise that I like to take my guests through is again imagining. So we went back 2 years at the beginning of this podcast. Now we're going to go forward. Uh, 80 years for you. Okay, so you'll say you're 102, and you're laying on your proverbial deathbed, and you are looking back at your life that you've lived over these 100 years. What kind of a life will you hope at the end you will have lived, that you can go peacefully and you can be proud of the time that you spent here in this human
Mm.
incarnation?
Another great question. I love these questions. I actually did an exercise like this one time on a plane ride. It was like writing your own will or writing your,
Eulogy.
yeah,
Yeah.
your eulogy.
One of
Yeah,
my newsletters is read this at my funeral. Yes.
that's awesome. That's a
Yeah.
really good exercise. I think everybody should try that just to like zoom out and think about like what type of man or woman do I want to be. But to answer your question, some things I wrote in that eulogy are like, above all, he was present, he was kind, he was a great father, which I'm not a father yet, but that's something that will be important to me.
Great
He
goal.
was a loving husband. He was always there for the people in his life, even if they were disconnected by geography, life, whatever. He was always a rock for those people to be able to feel secure around. He was a he was a present son and grandson. Yeah, I think those are some of the most important things, which is interesting because they don't necessarily revolve around business or success or accomplishments, right? Which that's why it's such a good exercise because it makes you realize what's important, what's
Yeah.
really, really important beneath all of the external success. Because
Yeah.
that's all gonna fade. We're all just building castles of sand,
Yes,
essentially.
man. Yeah. And all those castles of sand, business and success and audience and status will support your ability to have those true goals. But it's so important to be able to prioritize and know what really is important. You know,
Hmm.
how I love what you started with, dude. This is another mantra for me. How present am I? How am I showing up for the people in my life that I love and care about? Right? Like
Yeah,
I could either get 1 million followers tomorrow on social media, or I can be fully present and proud of the time that I spend with my daughters. It's a no fucking brainer, right? And
hmm,
and that's it sounds almost like trite, but that's a good thing to really meditate on, because we put so much effort into building our personal brand, building our business, this and that. It was always good to keep it in context of what really is important. And so I'm glad to hear you've done that exercise and you do have that in context. And it just takes discipline and mental and emotional discipline to always remind yourself of that, and never
yeah,
sacrifice the greater good. Again, to go back to Peterson, sacrifice the greater good for a lesser good. um and bullshit yourself into that. So yeah, I commend you on that, man, and try to always remember to keep your priorities straight.
yeah. Thank you. And this is a great reminder because literally right before this, I was writing about I haven't been present lately. I've been existing
Mhm.
in a constant state of tension and fear and anxiety and stress. And it's why I need to come full circle and integrate those two ideas of business and spirituality because what is the point of living if you're not present in each moment? You're
Yes.
just deluding yourself, essentially. And I'm saying this to myself too, because
Same.
a trap I've fallen into for a long time, kind of programmed into me by sports, is like if you just work really hard, you can go play Division 1 football. If you work really hard in school, you can go get the job. And so we're pushing off our life, thinking it's later, and even right now, because over the last 3 months or so, like my business quote unquote success has gone like exponential. And so I see it sometimes. I try to tell myself like just get through this month and then you can relax. Just get through these next two cohort launches and digital product launch. And then when you go to Europe in the summer, then you can finally relax. But it's a trap. That's 100% a trap. And so it's like,
Completely agree, man.
how can I not walk into that trap?
Yeah, another mantra of mine is don't postpone your happiness. A very simple way
Mm-hmm.
to put it, right? If you think and you can put relaxation, peace, equanimity. Don't postpone your equanimity. Don't postpone feeling
Yeah.
centered and okay and accepting of this moment as it is. Because if you bullshit yourself into saying I'll do it in a month after I'm done grinding, right? Then that's going to come along and you're going to, well, I'm not actually where I need to be. Okay, I'll postpone it one more month. You postpone it
Mm-hmm.
until your fucking deathbed, right? And it's funny, we were just talking about this off camera before we started. Like I've been in this mode of just writing, creating. I want to finish this book. I want to start this program and all that for such a long time that I didn't watch a minute of Netflix. I didn't watch movies. I just had this default of like I have a free hour. Okay, it's time to work. It's time to work. And since I've been in this relationship, it's been like okay, I have a free hour. I think actually what's aligned with my priorities is spending that free hour with her and just
Mm-hmm.
fucking sitting down and watching Netflix, right? And that's been it again at an identity level. Like I had a sticky identity of like Nick works his ass off all the time, no matter what, because there's all these things he wants to accomplish. And I've been leaning into like, but that is working towards theoretically sort of this future happiness, whereas I could have the happiness now. Now, there's a second layer to this, which I'm sure you'll vibe with, is you still do have to do the work. You can't ignore it,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to make sure whatever it is, if it's an hour a day of writing, if it's, if for myself, because I work full time, if it's 4 hours of deep work for an entrepreneur or something like that, you have to get that work done. And it's now infusing that happiness, that equanimity, that energy into the work itself and going, this is something I talked with Ego about too. We're sort of set up to over evaluate the end result and under evaluate the steps towards it, right? So we believe
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get this huge hit of happiness and fulfillment and dopamine, both dopamine when we hit the end result. And every little step along the way is just kind of a means to the end, right? And anyone that has had wild success can tell you, UFC fighters that win the title, the championship belt, and then in the hotel room that night they're depressed because they had this thing that they were working for so hard. Now that they have it, they don't know where to go next, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Academy Award winners winning, Oscars and then feeling depressed the night of. There's so many examples of stories that we hear. So you have to flip that on its head and actually put all of the value, the energy, the love and happiness into the work itself as much as possible. It's trite, but fall in love with the process itself. And then the outcome will just sort of take care of itself. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's an exercise I've been doing and I've been encouraging people to do is flip that natural tendency that you have on its head to imagine all the happiness is going to be at the end and realize the happiness has to be here and now every step of the
Mm-hmm.
journey.
Yeah. And it all goes back to presence because
Yes.
if you're present in the work, and I've experienced this where like you're present for 4 hours in your work and you're not thinking about rest. You're just focused and you're on it and you're right there. You can get so much done and then you can be present the rest of the day in the relaxation. But when
Yes.
like I like to think about it as like deep juxtaposition, like a deep work or deep rest, like
Yeah.
not in between. Because when you do in between, you can't escape the guilt. You can't escape the should I be doing more?
Yeah.
And that's something that I struggle with too, even when I do deep work in the morning, is being able to get away and detach without feeling guilt or like, oh, I should do this one little thing. But if you're able to be present in all moments and let yourself be at peace, that's what I'm going towards ultimately. And you said also like the reward is in the process, and sure, that's the platitude, but I think platitudes are platitudes because they're like rooted in deep truth, right? Like the Tao Te Ching is just platitudes essentially,
Yes.
right? But it's like the most profound book ever. So the people who like hate on platitudes, I actually love platitudes.
Yeah.
But I can attest to that because this happened last night. I woke up later this morning than I intended to, and so I was kind of pissed at myself. Checked my phone, checked my email. I made a sale last night while I was sleeping for like a pretty good amount of money,
Nice.
and I felt nothing. I felt nothing at all, except the fact that I was upset at myself because I didn't stick to my intention of waking up at the time I wanted to. And so
Mhm.
that's if that can go to serve an example as an example of like the thing you're striving for, the outcome you want that you think is gonna make you fulfilled and happy, it's not. Like you can only
100%.
feel fulfilled and happy within how each day to day is aligned and scheduled and what you do in that day.
It's a very deeply stoic idea too. What you just mentioned is, if you could sort of summarize stoicism, it's controlling what you can control and accepting what you can't control, right? And putting those in those
Mhm.
two categories. And when we do that exercise, we realize a lot of shit is outside of our control. We can influence it, right? We can sort of nudge it one way or the other. But what's really in our control is just our own actions, right? Our own ability to stay present. And then you get into sort of Buddhist stuff. Like we can't really even control our thoughts. Like, you got to really like actually just become, you control your ability to be aware of them and sort of how
Mm,
attached you get to them and all that, right? So that exact example, something that was outside of your control, making a sale over the middle of the night. This is work you've done in the past, right? To build this
yeah,
leverage, but that was outside of your control. What was in your control was waking up on time, right? And so that's why like that ability to recognize that of like, okay, I feel shitty even though I made this amount of money. Because why? Well,
yeah,
because I didn't control the one little piece that I can. And then the third thing that's in your control is forgiving yourself as soon as possible. Drop it, and it's
exactly.
time. It's time to get back to work and be present and live the best life that you can.
Damn, that's so good. And like that, I was kind of maybe subconsciously going through those steps today, but you put
Yeah.
it into much better words of like,
Speaking
you're
from
not always,
experience.
yeah, that's the thing. It's like when you are somebody who is pursuing something higher, a downside to that is the self criticism
Mhm.
of knowing you didn't wake up on time. You hit snooze. You didn't write the thing you wanted to write. And it's like you could always be doing more, but giving yourself that grace of like, it's okay. Like let's analyze why did this happen? And I could probably go back to yesterday and tell you why it happened. And then how do we move forward and get back on the right track? So like this morning, which is very rare because it's a Wednesday. Usually I'm like working, right? This morning, read Ken Wilber for an hour and a half, skipped a coffee, went on a run, cleaned the apartment, and now I'm on this podcast. And like, I didn't get any lever moving work done yet
Yeah.
today, but I've like cleaned, I cleaned my physical environment. I cleaned my mind, I would
Yes.
say, by going on that run and getting into nature. And then I'm trying to realign with that spiritual side with this reading of spirituality and philosophy. So I love that. And now I feel a little bit less guilty about the fact that I didn't do the deep work today because it's usually a staple. It's usually such a staple.
Yeah, and all that you just did, taking care of your mental, physical, and spiritual health is going to serve your ability to go back and do that work too, right? So
I hope
there's
so.
the
Yeah.
yeah, well, there's the actual like 80/20 and sort of like if you're just grinding, but you're not fulfilled, you're not grinding from the healthiest place, right? On those three aspects, body, mind, and spirit, then you're not going to produce the best work. So sometimes you got to go maintenance mode, right? You got to sort of take care of your mental, physical, and spiritual hygiene so that when you do show up to work, you can hit it with even higher, intensity and focus and creativity. So I commend you, man. I
Exactly.
think you deserved a Wednesday morning off, and I think
Thank
that
you.
that your work is gonna reflect that. Okay, so we've gone all over the place in this podcast. It's been
Yeah.
very nice. We're getting towards the end here. I gotta ask what I consider to be one of the biggest questions in the world, or definitely what I biggest question on this podcast. And I think you're going to be able to vibe with it. It's a little bit of a open-ended esoteric question, but the question is, what is this that we're stuck inside of here? What is consciousness? What is reality? What is the fact of experience beyond Jack, beyond your ideas of who you believe you are? But what is the greatest context of what we are in right here?
before I even answer, that's a question I feel like that cannot be answered in a way.
I agree.
So take anything I say with a grain of salt, but I could probably just draw on some reading and some personal experiences. So this is like a combination of Alan Watts and what's the guy's name? There's this book series called Conversations with God that was very
Hmm.
impactful on me too.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that there really is no purpose to it all. Life is meant to be enjoyed. As Watts would say, like the purpose of the dance is not the end of the dance. The purpose of the dance is the dance. It's the doing.
Yeah.
And from that book, Conversations of God, what essentially it talks about is we arise out of the universe. We are not separate from the universe. We are beings of the universe. And so throughout the 13 billion years or whatever that the universe has been in existence, it has evolved a consciousness to the point where it can understand itself. And I think that's the coolest thing about consciousness or humanity is if we are able to see the world as not separate from us but a part of us, we realize that we are just experiencing ourselves in a crazy way. Um, I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts. Is that in line
Yeah,
at all?
very much, bro. No, I mean, there's a lot of ways that I come at this. And again, it's a very broad question. It gets a lot of people. The last couple of times I've asked it, they've answered just like you have of, I'll start with this. I don't think it's answerable. And I think
Mm,
there's real spiritual humility in that because I agree. I think words are not the right tool to explain
yeah,
this, right? But it's like explaining a psychedelic trip. Words are not the best tool for explaining your experience on a psychedelic trip because it transcends language, right? So I think ultimate
yeah,
reality, every word that you try to use to sort of get at it is gonna fall flat. And so I love to hear people that start with that spiritual humility of I'm gonna fail, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. Right? I'm gonna try
yeah,
to
yeah,
explain this
yeah.
thing. One of the ideas that you pulled on, which I agree with a lot, is consciousness, the fact that there is awareness of something. There's not nothing. You can't experience nothing, right? Because there has to be something for it to be experienced. Is what I think is the fundamental basis of reality is consciousness. But the really cool thing is somewhere since the Big Bang and these 13 billion years of matter uh, doing its thing and running different experiments and collaborating in different ways, create a human being with a brain with the frontal cortex that was able to become conscious of the fact that it's conscious. Now, there may
Hmm.
be there may be aliens, who knows, maybe some animals, dolphins or whatever are too, I don't know for sure, but I know for sure that I've had the direct experience of being conscious of the fact that I'm conscious. There's consciousness looking out of these eyes. I am aware of things, right? And so that was a really nice sort of deeply humanistic take on what this is we're here and we're conscious of the fact that we're here. We don't know why we're here, like you were saying, Alan Watts talking about. There's no real purpose to it. I agree. I don't think that there's a separate divine creator that gives us purpose or meaning or any of that. I think purpose and meaning comes from us. We give purpose and meaning to everything that we interact with in this world, every experience that we have. And that's like deeply empowering to just go like, I don't have to look anywhere for meaning. I'm making meaning myself. So let me make the most meaningful meaning possible. Let me
Yeah.
align with the purpose that nobody else is going to give me, but I'm going to find within my own experience, within my own soul, and then live from that purpose, right? And so I really enjoyed that about your answer a lot. Is that this idea that yes, we're conscious of the fact that we're conscious, we're aware of the fact that we're aware. And from that place, we get to give meaning and purpose to everything that we experience.
Mm, I love that. And I might be able to give you a better answer in a couple months once I finish this 888 page Ken Wilber book. Because I
I
feel like he really hits on that topic deeply.
Yeah, hey, we'll put you back on the books, man. Maybe 6 months to a year after you've done some Ken Wilber and Alan Watts reading, we'll get you back on the podcast to get your updates
I'm
on
down.
your answers. Right on, man. Okay, so because we do get super deep here towards the end, I like to lighten it up a little bit and borrow a question from one of my all-time favorite podcasters, Pete Holmes, the comedian. So in the name of this podcast, Laughing Stoic Buddha, we're going to cover the first word. Tell me about a time that comes to mind that you've laughed really, really fucking hard, that there's tears rolling down your face, that your stomach hurts, that you just can't stop. What is a time that comes to mind that you've laughed really hard?
Mm. It's interesting because like usually it's just sheer appreciation of
Mm.
somebody being their raw, honest, weird, quirky self, and they just don't have any shame in that. Like, there's a couple friends, like the one friend I backpacked Europe with, like he like just him acting in the world is just hilarious to me for whatever reason. Like there's been a time we're like playing basketball when we are like 13, and he just did something so stupid. Like he's just like kind of a clown. Like everybody thinks he's a clown, but he's still a really smart guy, just like his personality. And I was laughing so hard, I like fell back, like literally crying, laughing, and I hit my head on the bricks and like cracked my head open because I was just laughing so hard at this dude, and it hasn't gone away. Like anytime I see him, it's the same way. So usually it's like just appreciating somebody's uniqueness and that they are not ashamed to show that they are weird. Because I love that. It makes me feel better for being so weird myself.
Bro, I vibe with that answer so much. I love it. It's people not trying to be funny. It's them naturally
Exactly. Yeah.
naturally
Yeah.
being themselves. And I too, I have such a deep appreciation for that, and it always makes me fucking chuckle. It makes me laugh crazy when
Yeah.
I see somebody just being their raw self. That's a beautiful answer, man.
Yeah, and
Very
it's
nice.
interesting because if I think of, I'm not super into comedy, honestly. Like I'll watch
Mm.
it sometimes, but like the comedians or people who I just cannot stop laughing at. I think of like Theo Vaughn,
Yep.
Joey Diaz,
Yep.
even like I just like listening to Alex Jones from a comedy perspective, just
Yes,
because of
yes.
how raw and passionate he is. Like I'm thinking of some clips in my mind, and they're just hilarious because they're not necessarily trying to be funny. That's such a good way to put it.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I saw Theo Von on my birthday this year, and I'd never laughed harder in my fucking life. I mean, my
Yeah,
abs were sore the next day. And he sees, I know there's craft to it. I know he's trying to be funny, but he really seems like he's not. He really seems like he's
yeah,
just being himself, man. And
yeah.
that's part of his genius. Yeah, right on,
He's
man.
great. And even like Alex Hormozy, like
Yeah.
he's definitely not trying to be funny. But me and my friend who I live with, like we watched a podcast yesterday with him and Chris Williamson, the new one that just came out. And
Hmm.
like he is so funny because he just doesn't care what
Yeah.
anybody thinks about him. And he'll say exactly what he thinks. And it's awesome.
He's a fucking weirdo, and he's not afraid to show it.
No.
Right on, man. Okay, beautiful answer, Jack. Dude, you absolutely murdered this podcast in a good way. Great job. And I feel like we really caught you at this cool moment in your life, this cool little chapter,
Yeah.
this transitionary time. And I think that it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people, especially young creators who maybe are in a similar place, or maybe they need to start leading into a similar place of finding some balance, reintegrating some spiritual health, and diving into that. And so I think this is going to be a very valuable podcast to put out there into the world. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for asking me on. I had a great time. These questions are not like what I've been thinking about as much top of mind because it's always like business strategy, like all this stuff, you know? And so it's good to come back to the middle way or the tower, whatever we want to call it. I do feel like this is very important that I did this. So I really appreciate you asking me to come on, and I hope people will get some value out of it.
Oh man, I'm honored, and like I said, do some spiritual studying, and we'll get you back here when you feel like you're ready, and you have another layer to add to these deep questions that we're talking about.
Sounds good. I'll keep you posted.
All right, buddy. Peace. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit the like button. If you want to watch more podcasts like this in the future, subscribe and hit the notification to be notified when they come up. If you want to keep up with me, I am on Twitter now every day at Write with a W already. Link to that will be in the description. If you want to check out my writing, I publish a newsletter every Friday through Substack. Link to that will also be in the description. I love you guys, and let's keep doing this together. Peace.